Bralen Trice went through on-field drills at the Combine on Thursday. How's he doing?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's feeling better, and he writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today. And this episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Lars, let's have some more Combine fun, where the Combine is officially underway in Indianapolis, and today is defensive linemen that are doing all the early drills. And I know we're recording this a little bit before Edefwani Lefoshi is going to get a chance to test, but Bralen Trice was one of the big headliners, not only in terms of, the edge rushers from this class and everything, but in terms of some of his numbers as well. What's the first thing that stood out to you when you look at just some of the reports that are coming out of Indianapolis today?
Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But he does look and seem a little slimmer. Obviously, the numbers look, not in terms of his testing numbers, but in terms of his measurables. He looks...
Yeah, where he dropped 30 pounds. He listed at 245 pounds now, yeah.
And that, to me, and again, I think when you're thinking of him as a defensive end edge rusher, right? Because, again, if you're having a three technique, you want it maybe like in that Red Bryant mold, a little bit bigger, maybe like, 6'1", 302. But if you're just a pass rusher and you're just a disruptor, you want to be as quick and agile as possible while still having muscle. And so I think 235, 245 is kind of a good range for him, to where you're not getting down too small to where it's like, ooh, can he actually handle getting pushed around by some of these NFL offensive linemen? So I think that one to me was just, forget the testing. That's the one that stood out to me first and foremost.
So I was impressed with some of his testing numbers, and we'll get to that in a minute. But one thing, and our buddy Ben Glassmeyer wrote about it a little bit over on Huskies Wire, is when you look at his numbers, or in terms of his weight, this could also just be a move strictly for testing at the Combine, where his team told him, hey, if you drop to 245, 250, somewhere in that range, it'll be a lot easier for teams to just look at you strictly as an edge rusher and not, let's just say, Brandon Dorlus, who's going to be a little bit of a tweener, where he's going to play a lot of edge, but he's going to play some defensive tackle, which is what Washington had him do a little bit. Where at the next level, he does seem that he's going to do all his best work on the edge. So just saying, all right, we'll make you look like a true edge rusher, and we can bulk you back up to, let's just call it 255, 260 by the time he tests again at the pro day at the end of March. So why not, put really good numbers on film, or just in front of the NFL scouts now, and then, get back to it at the end of March, and you'll be a little bit heavier and you'll be a little bit more where you're actually going to play at. But, you can just worry about getting some nice athletic testing numbers on the books now.
Right, and I think it's obviously a good sign, because as Saints Wire put out earlier today, that he met with the Saints at the Combine, and then Raiders Nation on Fan Nation put out that he had talked with the Raiders. So teams are clearly receptive to this. They're wanting to, and that's kind of a good sign for Bralen, right? Because I think you had mentioned, or at least highlighted on another show about a week or so ago, that some of these other pass rushers are kind of not leaping over him, but getting more attention than him, right? And so when we talked about players that might impress at the Combine, Bralen was one of those, and coming in a little slender, not slim, but kind of, trimmed down a little bit, kind of gives teams like, oh, hey, this guy is actually taking this seriously. He's all about football. Because when you talk with Bralen, we both talked with him at length. I remember covering his recruitment out of Santa Dara Connor, and it was just one of those, you could just tell he was a football kid. He's a great talker. He's a great person. Just kind of likes to have fun, but in the right way, knows when to have fun, knows when to turn it on and have business. And I think teams are going to start seeing, maybe we can use this guy in a number of different roles, where maybe if we wanted to get a little bigger, could he, fill out more? It's like, yeah, he's shown he could carry more weight, and he's shown that he can trim down. So I think when he's meeting with he's not meeting with just two teams at the Combine, obviously. Like if those two teams
he's probably met with every single team throughout the course of the interview process.
Right. And so I think that's why teams are thinking, hey, how can we use him? And that's kind of Bralen's best chip, is his versatility, where we saw him at times come up the middle. Now, again, he's not going to be a defensive tackle by any stretch of the imagination. Nobody would confuse him for a defensive tackle. But being able to be athletic enough and have the NFL IQ and the kind of just the general football IQ to know to play at different positions, handle different sort of things at different weights, to me tells me I think he's going to continue to rise up the draft boards. And when he comes and tests at the pro day at Washington in late March, I think he's probably going to be right at that first round edge, almost kind of where Joe Tryon was to a degree.
So let's talk about a little bit about some of these other players in the class, where some of the testing numbers we've seen today have made it really, really interesting. One guy, especially who really stood out is Chop Robinson, where he put up a 4.49 40-yard dash, where that's really impressive. That's one of the best we've ever seen from an edge rusher. We saw Jared Verse go out there and put up some really good numbers. Laiatu Latu is putting out some really good testing numbers as well, which, as a former Washington guy is no surprise to either of us, where, obviously the neck injury is one thing, and we'll kind of see what the medicals look like moving forward. But when you look at just where Bralen might stand, I don't know if it was the best day for him in total. And it's not to any fault of his own, but it's some of the other guys also put up really spectacular numbers. I know Ben Solak pointed out on Twitter that Dallas Turner, he came in a little bit shorter than expected, but he also has a 6'11" wingspan. He is just a freak of nature when you look at just his size and his arms. So that's something where that might improve his stock a little bit. And it's getting down to that time where you're going to start nitpicking prospects. And you say, oh, well, Chop is really good in this area. Jared Verse is really good in that area. Laiatu Latu is really good with this. And maybe that's one of the reasons that Bralen Trice had to slim down so much, is you look at some of these other guys and some of the really nice numbers that they put up. Bralen wasn't going to do that at 270 pounds, 275 pounds. So maybe it's when you look at, some of the RAS numbers, the weight and the size, they weren't necessarily very high up there in terms of percentage, but all his other numbers were really, really nice. And it felt like that was kind of a calculated move by some of his advisors, just saying to get down to this weight, because this has been a really impressive edge group so far. And there are some other names we haven't talked about that are potentially going to be rising really, really far as well. So the more you look at it, the more you say, okay, maybe Bralen does fall out of the first round. Maybe he goes somewhere between that 25 and 32. I don't know. Maybe he falls somewhere down to the mid 40s and potentially even to the 50s, just depending on how this draft class works out. There's a very wide range of outcomes for him right now. But if that does happen, it feels like somebody might be getting a steal with this kid, just with his production numbers and everything he's put on tape so far, with leading the country in pressures for 2 seasons in a row, that once he gets back up that playing weight, that he's still going to make an impact at the NFL level.
Exactly. I mean, you know the last player to lead college football in back-to-back years in pressures?
Was it Will Anderson?
Yeah, exactly. And so now, granted, now Will goes number 1 overall for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, he's
number 3.
What did I say? Number 1?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, he was the number 1 player in the class, but
I was going to say, but ended up still going to the team that had the first pick with Houston Texans. But with all that being said, it's the impact that you can't. There's some of these testing numbers you can kind of say, oh, hey, this could be this could be that. When you see instant impact, and again, we think about it in a way where Budda Baker wasn't a first-round pick. Some of these other guys weren't a first-round pick. So just because you're not a first-round pick, it almost kind of adds more of a chip on your shoulders. And I will say, I think just long-term with the way that NIL is working with college football and guys are coming back longer and longer, some of these draft classes are going to continue to get more and more stacked. So you're going to, like you said, have some of those nitpick arguments, or in any other year of the last 5 years, Bralen's probably a first-round pick, or some of these other guys are a first-round pick. But because now they're all in the same class, like the receiver class, which I'm sure we'll talk about here in the next segment, there's so many guys in that class. Like, okay, any other year, these guys are all wide receiver 1, but they all just happen to came out in the same class. So it's not for a lack of, oh, hey, so-and-so is better than him, or he's not as good, or whatever. These guys are all just good. It's just a personal preference based on the team and kind of the fit and scheme-wise. And I think Bralen is specifically, that's where his versatility helps, but then also where it could hinder him, where, hey, he doesn't excel great at all. Like, he's not A+ in this, but he's like a B+ or an A- in all these categories. So it's just a matter of which one do teams prefer.
Right. Lars, with that being said, let's talk about some of the other positions in this draft class. Right after a message from our new friends over at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. It's got class exclusive Google built in, which is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure, and the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder has room up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability with 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is right there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. So, Lars, one of the big news of the day was Jack Westover, where he got up in front of the reporters on the podium. And, we all knew about the partially torn calf that he suffered leading up to the national championship. But he also discussed that he had a bone chip and a couple other injuries in his hand that required surgery. So he's not undergoing testing this week at the NFL Combine, but this is still somebody who I think is going to make a pretty solid impact and could find his name called in probably the 4th or 5th round at this point.
Yeah, I mean, he's the perfect guy to talk about during leap year and leap day because, I mean, the one thing that Jack Westover was kind of known for, especially in his last 2 years at Washington, was some of those little leaping hurdles he would have towards the end of plays. But I think that, and again, it speaks to his athleticism. It speaks to he's not just a blocker. He's able to be a pass catcher. And when you look at, like Drew Sample is kind of the perfect example of this, where he's not Travis Kelce, where he's going to be, that flexed out, 1,000-yard guy, even 500-yard guy or something like that. But with that being said, he's reliable in every stretch of the word. Where he's a reliable pass catcher. Where Jack Westover never really had the drops that Devin Culp did. Right now, Devin certainly cleaned those up towards the end of his career.
Absolutely, he did. Yeah,
but Jack kind of was able to excel at almost every little facet that a tight end has to. Which, to your point, is why he's not going to be a day 1 or day 2 pick, but he certainly is going to go in day 3 somewhere, whether it's 4 or 5, 6 or 7. Just because when you look at what NFL tight ends have to do, and again, he doesn't have to be the A1 tight end. He can kind of carve out that Will Dissly mold of being a 2nd or 3rd tight end, where he's not Colby Parkinson. He's not tall. He's not going to wow you with his catching ability. He will when he needs to, but he kind of just does every little thing that you need to. And that's how guys stay 5, 6, 7 years in the league. When you're not, let's say, a consistent starter, is you're a special teamer. You're a guy that can kind of just do all the little things. And again, as a person, Jack couldn't be more humble. And just, again, the fact that he played 2 high school games in his career before walking on to Washington to now being a potential drafted tight end, which kind of speaks to the ability that he has to develop and kind of thrive when counted out, so to say.
Absolutely. And then that's another thing that our good buddy Alex Katzen actually wrote about over on Huskies Wire, because he's down in Indianapolis right now. And one thing that I talked about with him was his flexibility and his ability to not only play tight end, but play H-back as well. And, this is not a comparison here, but when you think about a guy like Kyle Juszczyk with the San Francisco 49ers, where that's a role that you can see Jack playing, where it's kind of a 2nd or 3rd tight end role sometimes, but you're playing in the backfield a lot, you're doing a lot of run blocking, and at the same time, you can line up at tight end, you can line up at a receiver if need be, and just be a pass catcher and utilize that athleticism in so many different ways. Like you just said, where, it might not necessarily be special teams work, but there are a lot of different things that a guy like him can do. And it's just all about getting him in the room where he's really smart. He's a really good pass catcher. He's a really good athlete. And it's just all about finding a role for him, because you saw him show up in clutch scenarios so many times for Washington. You think about the 4th down catch against Oregon, the 4th down catch against Utah. He always knows that he needs to show up big in some of those moments, and he delivers every time. So it's really cool to see him just starting to get that recognition. And, hopefully he can recover from these injuries in a somewhat decent time period where, I wouldn't expect him to do much testing at the pro day either, depending on what his calf situation looks like. But moving forward, he's somebody who'd probably be ready for mini camps in the summer. So that's just, I think that he's somebody who could really surprise some people. While he might get drafted, not necessarily very high, but once he does get onto an NFL roster, he might open some eyes. And with that being said, let's talk about one of the other exciting stories of the day, where Kyrie Jackson got on the podium and he said that Troy Franklin was a tougher wide receiver to cover than Rome Odunze. And what was the first thing you thought when you saw that?
Well, so here's the kind of crux of the situation, where when you go read through those comments and just scroll through the glorious exchange there,
it's something.
There's a couple of ways to take this, right? Where, okay, did he give up I'm looking at the PFF numbers, and I don't remember him specifically giving up a touchdown because, I mean, Trice Bridges gave up the game-winning touchdown.
He did give up a touchdown. It wasn't to Rome. He gave up a touchdown to Jalen Polk.
Right, exactly. And so that's why I appreciate and I applaud Kyrie for kind of standing on business and saying, hey, it wasn't me that got torched by Rome. You can say I gave up a touchdown to some other UW receiver, but I didn't get torched by Rome. Here's the problem with that. And here's what Oregon fans are kind of not picking up on, which neither here nor there, is the fact that when you say, hey, I didn't get torched by Rome, it wasn't me, what do you say? You're saying your teammates got torched by Rome. You're saying somebody else gave up. Now, again, you're not straight up saying that verbatim, saying, hey, it wasn't me. I mean, yeah, everybody else got burned by Rome, but I was good. It's like, well, wait a minute. Maybe then why aren't you covering Rome every single time? Like, if you're the A1 cornerback, shouldn't you be guarding the A1 receiver? Which, again, maybe gets get into the coaching and why Grove was able to scheme him open on certain things. But I also could recall Kyrie getting hurt against Washington.
He did.
Being taken out for several plays where if he doesn't get hurt, maybe he's on the field to defend Rome and not give up that last game-winning touchdown in October. That being said, didn't. End of the story. But to say that you're not throwing your defense under the bus by saying, hey, I didn't get torched by Rome, it wasn't me.
Well, couple things there. The first one being on the second drive, it's Washington's second offensive possession. He got burned on a 3rd and 3 for a 43-yard reception after that offside penalty. So he still did give up a whole lot of yardage to Rome Odunze. And he did get an interception in that game, to his credit. But let's look at some of the other things that happened in that game. Rome Odunze played that first game against Oregon with a punctured lung and a broken rib, and went for 128 and two scores. So while that's not all on Kyrie Jackson, that part wasn't the best look. And I get the whole Washington Oregon rivalry. It's fun. It is what it is. I enjoy seeing the exchange, but you got to give him a little bit of credit there. And and of course you want to credit your teammate Trey Franklin. That's cool. I don't have a problem with that either. That's fine. But just flat out saying no, come on, man. Rome Odunze might be picked in the top 5 for a reason. And you can just find 15 seconds of nice things to say there. And, it's splitting hairs at a certain point. And, I'm not trying to bag on anybody, but that's just something where I feel like there was a much different response that you could have had there.
Right, exactly. I mean, you could have just left it as, hey, you know what, Rome's a good player, but Troy's my teammate. I played with him for 2-3 years, whatever. Because Kyrie didn't play with him his entire career. It was
just the 1 year, yeah.
Right.
And you can say I practice against this guy every day, so yeah, there's a lot that you can say about that.
Right. There's plenty of things you can say. Hey, I can't speak to Rome. Obviously, I didn't give up a touchdown against him. They beat us a couple of times, but he didn't. You can even go that far without going to the over the edge of saying, because then the other side of it was he also said that, I don't know, did he say it or was it implied where he said if Troy was on Washington, Rome was on Oregon, Troy beats.
Oh, I didn't see that.
So I think that might have been just some fans comment because basically it was implying that, Troy is better than Rome because if Troy was on Washington's roster and Rome was on Oregon's roster, that Washington would have won by 20 or something.
No.
I'm not saying Kyrie said that, but again, it's just kind of.
I'm just saying no to the whole comment. Yeah,
exactly. It's the whole encompassing of there's plenty of ways to say it, right? And again, like you said, we get the rivalry. I started my monologue out by saying, hey, I appreciate him standing on business. Nothing wrong with that. I respect it. Here's the problem. That Oregon game in October, Kyrie Jackson, 4 targets, 3 receptions, had a PFF coverage grade of 47.2. There's only 2 other players on Oregon's defense that had a worse coverage grade. Nico Reed at 44.7 and Trice Bridges at 44.1. So again, you're not in great company there. But again, Kyrie's a good player. So I'm not trying to bag on the kid much like I remember my tweet a couple of years ago about Kayvon Thibodeau where he had led the Pac-12 in most missed tackles. Again, you can take that for what you will. But again, I'm not bagging on the kid. He's obviously a top 5 player, top 5 talent. Kyrie is, I'm sure, going to find a roster spot in the NFL.
Absolutely. He'll probably be picked on day 2. He'll end up in a decent spot. Yeah.
But to say what he said at the podium, again, I understand the rivalry, but again, there's plenty of different ways to word that.
Absolutely. And just kind of to wrap that up, just one interesting note about Rome Odunze that's come out over the last couple of days. Shout out to Bucky Brooks on NFL Total Access, where he said that Rome is and Malik Neighbors too, are both closer to Marvin Harrison Jr. than people think. Where I don't think either of them are going to end up being picked above Marvin Harrison Jr. just with the way this whole draft process has played out and just how long he's been just so firmly ensconced in that top receiver position. But this is such a fun receiver class, man. It's so cool to see where we could have all three of these guys go inside the top 10. We look at some of these other fun receiving classes in recent years, the Jamar Chase class in 2021, CeeDee Lamb in 2020, where, that class didn't work out necessarily nearly as well as it might have from just the other guys that were picked in that area. But with the way receiver classes are going right now, and the fact that this one could be so much better than just some of the other ones that we've seen that have really put up historic numbers is really fun. And shout out to Rome for just being a really fun player to cover, as well as just watching him play on the field. And Lars, let's get into a little recruiting talk before we get out of here. Right after a message from our friends over at FanDuel, because you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So Lars, two guys that you and I are both really high on in this recruiting class, Mark Henniker and Chinu Onyegoro, they both got offered by Georgia in the last couple of days. And Mark Henniker had started setting his summer official visit dates. He set 5 visits, including one to Washington. Onyegoro hasn't officially announced all its official visits yet. It feels like Washington is going to be in the mix there as well. But Georgia getting involved is really interesting, and not only does it speak to Washington's talent evaluation process, but this coming in late for 2 of these top defensive targets the Huskies have. Are you a little concerned by that?
No, because I mean, in reality, it does speak to the evaluation process because, again, while Washington wants all these guys, we know Washington can't get all these guys, much like Georgia won't get all these guys, right? So it's a matter of, okay, how are you viewed? How are you evaluated? Because then every now and then you'll find somebody else where, hey, okay, let's say Ilan Contra goes to Georgia or somewhere else, and you take the second linebacker, and it's like, hey, they work out both. They both work out, right? Where
sure,
what stands out to me is, again, it's more validation for Jedd Fisch, right? And the fact that 2 months into his tenure at Washington, we're talking about Georgia and Washington having recruiting battles. You would have normally thought there'd be a different school next to Georgia when it comes to discussing recruiting battles. So for Jedd to have to be in kind of those discussions, I mean, you talk about Baratani looking at both Georgia and Washington, where those are probably going to be his final 2 schools at this point. But with a number of different recruits, it's like, hey, you know what? Washington's there, and Georgia's saying, hey, you know what? Now we got to go compete with Washington. Now, again, everybody hearing this, like, oh, well, Georgia doesn't compete with Washington. They're just trying to get in the mix. It's like, well, but again, a school knows, hey, this kid's favoring him heavily, so now we got to get in the mix now versus waiting until, let's say, June, July, or August, where it's like, sure, okay, now we're a little bit, we're now we got to try and get him to flip because we think we're Georgia and we can get him. It's like, no, this kid really likes him. Get in now, and you'll be able to be there in the end versus having to kind of flip a kid late. And again, it just speaks to the testament of what Washington's trying to do on the recruiting trail. It's exactly what we both thought would happen.
Right. And then let's talk about this from just a standpoint of both these guys being front 7 players. You and I have both emphasized that the front 7, along with the offensive line, is probably going to be the most important part of this year's recruiting class. With moving into the Big Ten, just seeing what needs to happen to just compete body-wise, roster-wise, scheme-wise, whatever it might be, that a strong front 7 and a strong offensive line are going to take you a long way. So it's not just that aspect, because we know that that same philosophy applies in the SEC as well. And both these guys being members of the front 7, that's where I kind of look at it. That's why I ask the concern question, where obviously we're not comparing Georgia and Washington at all. That would be a silly discussion to have. But when you just look at these 2 guys who have been on Washington for a long time, where they were really interested when Caleb DeBoer's staff was here, they're still really interested now with Jedd Fisch's staff. So, and especially when you look at the linebacker position, where that's going to be the one where personally, I think that might be the more important than any position that's not offensive line. in this coming cycle, which might be a hot take because I know, the positional value of a linebacker is not necessarily what it used to be. But when you just look at who's going to be in the room next year, right now, the scholarship players that will be on the roster for the 2025 season are Devin Bryant, Jordan Whitney, and Kamori House. I like all three of those players a lot. I know you do as well, but that's not enough and not even close. When you think about talent-wise, when you think about depth-wise, again, they're all really good, but you need a lot more. Where I wouldn't be surprised if Devin Bryant and Jordan Whitney are the two starters next season, kind of no matter what happens in the transfer portal. But I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this and I'm saying, all right, when I look at Mark Hennecourt, that looks like a guy who might be able to contribute for a couple games as a freshman. I look at Matai Tagoai, another guy who, had set his official visit to Washington, where he's a little bit slimmer. He's not necessarily as physically ready as someone like a Hennecourt is when you just look at their frame and just the way they're built. But I look at those two guys and I say, all right, I see a world where both those guys are asked to contribute a little bit. I look at Mason Posa in New Mexico, another one of my just favorite prospects in this class. I say that's somebody who might be able to contribute a little bit. You get two of those three guys, ask them to play 4 games each while you don't burn their red shirt. You just try to get them in the mix, get them playing a little bit and say, okay, yeah, we see what we have with these guys and we like it. We know that these are guys that we can roll with. And at that position, with the way that some of these Big Ten schools are going to try to run the ball, that's one of the reasons that I say linebacker is going to be more important than some people think.
No, I agree. And I think as you were saying, I kind of just think of the defense that Steve Belichick wants to run. Obviously, bringing Robert Bala from Alabama to work specifically with the inside linebacker. So it kind of even tells you more how Belichick is viewing the linebackers in this scheme. And I think, then you look at this year when you have Carson Bruner and Alfonso Chiaputala. Carson Bruner is kind of the prototypical NFL linebacker of that pair. So you just think, okay, this is what we're going to try and mold our defense around. And so, and to your points, it's Chris Peterson would be proud of this word, cyclical, or how positions are viewed, right? Where years ago, hey, running backs, you can kind of just let them go. And now it's like, hey, wouldn't it be kind of bad to have a really good 1A running back, maybe spend a second round pick, invest some legitimate capital. You don't have to invest a top 5 pick or whatever, But same thing with receivers where, receivers are a dime a dozen, the quarterback makes the receiver. Well, no, I mean, you kind of want some talented receivers out there. So, there's certain ways in which you can kind of make it work. And I think I agree to an extent to your point about, and I think it's more for in contour than anything else, where getting him out of Narbonne would kind of, that's one of those West Coast traditional Keyshawn B area. Think about the history of linebackers that have come out of that program. That's one where, okay.
Hey, shout out Troy Williams too. While we're on the topic of Narbonne, shout out Troy Williams.
Exactly. No, that's a pull from the bag. But no. But obviously slightly different position than those two play. But still worth noting. Exactly to your point. But I think I could kind of see. Okay, if you're going to get one of the two, maybe try and get Matai Tagoai and Marketing Contour, right? Kind of if you could get that pair, you're good.
Right. I agree. I still think that you might need 3 where it's more of a depth thing than it is anything else. And if you can get 3 high-end guys like in a Hennecourt and Mason Posa, or like I don't know about Zadris Rainey Sale at this point, just in terms of just his relationship with Kalen DeBoer's staff, or I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee is heavily in the mix for him now with William Inge going over there. So we'll kind of see what happens with him as well, where obviously that's a guy you want to keep home if you can. But after decommitting from Washington following a coaching staff change, I wouldn't be surprised if, he's still interested and is feeling out things with Jed Fish's staff, but there's just might be a lot of ground to make up compared to some of the relationships that he has right now. So that's why you look at some of these other guys and you just say, yeah, I see a path for Matai Tagoai, where that's a kid you take no matter what. When you look at his film, you get him in the room and you find a place to play him, where I know we talked a little bit about with Camber on Thursday's show. We talked a little bit about just the Steve Belichick style of defense and how there's going to be a lot of flexibility, and there are going to be guys playing just in a whole bunch of different spots and asked to do a whole lot of different things. He fits that mold perfectly, kind of like what Jelani Tavai or Jabril Peppers did with the Patriots for a while, where they're asked to do a whole bunch of different things. But then you look at a Mason Posa, you look at Mark Hennecourt, where they're going to be a traditional Mike or Will linebacker for you for the most part, but they're athletic enough and they move enough to go do a whole bunch of different things. And in the Big Ten, again, where so many teams want to run the ball, Wisconsin, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, the way that they like to run the ball all over the place, especially when you look at the running back room Ohio State's putting together, getting a top tier linebacker core that can make those plays and just be really strong and not be what we've seen from some of these Washington defenses over the past couple of years, where they're breaking through linebackers more often than not. Where especially when Edefon Ulofoshio was down for a good portion of 2021. It's one of the big reasons when we saw a lot of that happen. So trying to beef up that position, I think is a good idea long term.
Exactly. I mean, I think that kind of speaks to just the overall. Okay, if you're moving into the Big Ten, you are now in the Power Four of college football. You are one of the big boys of college football. Now you have to recruit and act like it, and that doesn't mean just, hey, we're going to get 1 4 or 5 star and then the rest is 3 stars, right? You're not pumping up the, hey, we're going to give this guy every opportunity and we don't want to threaten him. It's like, no, you want to continue to stack talent in the room because again, injuries, things like that at various positions. And so that's how you build an NFL team. Is you look at any NFL team, it's like, okay, well, you lose your starter, that's significant, but that's why you have backups and significant backups and invest in draft capital and high second round picks, knowing you have a starter already. It's like, hey, just in case he goes down and he's getting up there in age, we want to make sure our fall off isn't that far. That's how you build a program for the long-term success.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support, and we've got so much fun content coming for you throughout the rest of this offseason. So just make sure that you're tuned in for that by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you hit that bell icon so you never miss a video. And then please make sure to like the video, leave us a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and leave us an audio 5-star review for your audio only, as it all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Monday.